The summer of 1852 brought suffocating heat to Magnolia Grove Plantation, but nothing compared to the moral suffocation that would soon engulf its inhabitants. Constance Whitmore stood in the grand parlor, her silk dress clinging to her perspiring frame as she made a decision that would haunt generations. Her daughter Eleanor, 23 and weighing nearly 300 pounds, sat motionless in her reinforced chair, unaware that her mother was about to trade her dignity for 3 bags of cottonseed. The plantation was failing. Creditors circled like vultures, and Constance's late husband had left debts that threatened to consume everything. In her desperation, she had conceived a plan so morally bankrupt that even the devil himself might have hesitated. 3 of her strongest enslaved men, Samuel, Moses, and Isaiah, would be given a choice that was no choice at all. Eleanor's obesity had made her unmarriageable in polite society. No gentleman caller had visited in years, and Constance blamed her daughter's condition for their social isolation. In her twisted logic, if Eleanor could not secure a husband through conventional means, perhaps she could serve another purpose entirely. The 3 men would be promised their freedom papers in exchange for providing Eleanor with the companionship she craved, and the heir Constance desperately needed to secure the plantation's future. As thunder rumbled overhead, Constance summoned the 3 men to the main house, her heart pounding with the weight of her decision. She told herself this was survival, but deep down, she knew she was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Samuel Washington had been born into bondage on Magnolia Grove, his powerful frame and intelligent eyes marking him as different from birth. At 35, he had watched 2 generations of Whitmores come and go, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Standing beside Moses and Isaiah in the oppressive heat of the parlor, he felt the weight of Constance's proposition settle over them like a burial shroud. Moses, barely 25 with calloused hands that spoke of endless labor, stared at the floor as Constance outlined her terms. His wife Sarah lived on a neighboring plantation, and he had been saving every spare moment to earn enough to purchase her freedom. Now this white woman offered him liberation at a price that would destroy his soul. Isaiah, the youngest at 22, possessed a gentle spirit that had somehow survived the brutality of plantation life. He had never known his parents, sold away when he was barely walking, and had clung to his faith as his only anchor. The proposition before him felt like a test from God himself, though he could not fathom what the correct answer might be. Constance's voice cut through the humid air like a blade. Freedom papers, legal documents that would transform them from property to men. The words hung between them, tantalizing and terrible. They could walk away from Magnolia Grove, start new lives, find their families, but the cost would be participating in something that violated every principle they held sacred. Eleanor remained upstairs, unaware that her fate was being negotiated like a commodity. The 3 men exchanged glances, each seeing his own moral struggle reflected in the other's eyes. They had one night to decide. Eleanor Whitmore had spent most of her adult life invisible, despite her considerable physical presence. Her obesity had begun in childhood, a combination of her mother's indulgence and her own emotional eating, as she watched the world of Southern society close its doors to her one by one. Now, confined to the upper floors of the plantation house, she existed in a liminal space between privilege and imprisonment. She had overheard fragments of conversation, whispered discussions between her mother and the overseer about money troubles and mounting debts. The plantation, that had once hosted grand parties and welcomed distinguished guests, now felt like a tomb, its empty rooms echoing with the ghosts of better times. Eleanor understood that her unmarried state had become another burden on her mother's shoulders, another problem to be solved. From her bedroom window, she could see the 3 men her mother had summoned. Samuel, who had taught her to read when she was young, and the governess had fled. Moses, whose wife's absence had carved lines of sorrow into his face. Isaiah, whose hymns she sometimes heard drifting from the quarters on Sunday evenings. These were not strangers to her, but men whose lives had intersected with hers in the strange ecosystem of plantation life. The irony was not lost on her that while she possessed legal freedom, she was as trapped as any enslaved person on the property. Her body had become her prison, her social status a gilded cage. She had dreams once, of travel, of love, of a life beyond these suffocating walls. Now, at 23, she felt ancient, her hopes withered like cotton left too long in the field. As darkness fell, Eleanor sensed that something was about to change forever. The old tobacco barn stood at the edge of the plantation, like a monument to forgotten prosperity. Its weathered boards had witnessed decades of Magnolia Grove's history, the prosperity of earlier years, the gradual decline, and now this moment that would define them all. Samuel had chosen this place for their meeting, away from the main house and the overseer's quarters, where they could speak freely about the impossible choice before them. Moses arrived first, his footsteps heavy on the dirt floor, scattered with old tobacco leaves. The familiar smell of cured leaf and aged wood usually comforted him, but tonight it felt oppressive, like breathing in the weight of history itself. He had spent the day thinking about Sarah, imagining her face when he told her he was free. But how could he explain the price of that freedom? Isaiah entered quietly, his Bible clutched against his chest. He had been praying since leaving the main house, searching for guidance in Scripture, but finding only more questions. Was this a test of faith, like Job's trials? Or was it temptation disguised as opportunity? The moral complexity threatened to overwhelm his young mind. Samuel was the last to arrive, carrying the burden of leadership that had been thrust upon him by circumstance and respect. The other enslaved people looked to him for guidance, and he felt the weight of their expectations alongside his own moral struggle. He had seen too much cruelty, too much injustice, to believe that any choice they made would be purely right or wrong. The three men sat in a circle on overturned crates, the barn's shadows dancing around them in the lamplight. They had until dawn to decide their fate. The conversation in the barn began with silence, each man wrestling with thoughts too complex for immediate words. Samuel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper in the cavernous space. He talked about freedom, not just the legal papers, but the concept itself. What did it mean to be free if the price was participating in something that felt fundamentally wrong? Moses shared his anguish about Sarah, describing how she had been sold away 3 years ago and how he had been working toward purchasing her freedom ever since. The overseer at her current plantation had agreed to a price, more money than Moses could earn in a lifetime of normal labor. Constance's offer represented a shortcut to reunion with his wife, but at what cost to his soul? Isaiah spoke of his faith, of the teachings that had sustained him through the darkest moments of bondage. He had always believed that God had a plan, that suffering served a purpose, but this situation challenged everything he thought he understood about right and wrong. How could something that led to freedom be morally corrupt? How could something that felt wrong be the answer to his prayers? The hours passed slowly, marked by the distant chiming of the plantation house clock. They discussed Eleanor, trying to understand her position in this twisted arrangement. Was she as much a victim as they were? Could they find a way to protect her dignity while securing their own freedom? The questions multiplied faster than the answers. As dawn approached, they realized that whatever decision they made would change them forever. There was no choice that would leave them untainted, no path that would preserve their innocence. They were being forced to choose between different forms of moral compromise. Eleanor had not slept. From her window, she had watched the lamplight in the tobacco barn burn through the night. understanding instinctively that her fate was being decided in that weathered building. As the first rays of dawn crept across the plantation grounds, she made a decision that surprised even herself. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she made her way slowly down the stairs and across the yard to the barn. The three men looked up in shock as she appeared in the doorway, her massive frame silhouetted against the morning light. She had never ventured this far from the house alone, and her presence transformed the entire dynamic of their situation. For the first time, the person most affected by Constance's scheme was part of the conversation. Eleanor's voice was steady as she spoke, revealing that she had overheard enough to understand the basic terms of her mother's proposition. She talked about her own imprisonment, her own desperate desire for freedom from the suffocating confines of her existence. She understood their moral dilemma because she faced her own version of it: accept this arrangement and gain some form of human connection, or refuse and remain forever isolated. What emerged from their conversation was an unexpected alliance. Eleanor proposed a different solution, one that would satisfy her mother's demands while preserving everyone's dignity. They would go through the motions of the arrangement, creating the appearance of compliance while actually forming a protective partnership. She would claim pregnancy after an appropriate time, securing their freedom papers, while they would provide her with the companionship and protection she craved. It was a conspiracy born of desperation, but it offered hope where none had existed before. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt like an active participant in her own life, rather than a passive victim of circumstance. The charade that followed required careful orchestration and constant vigilance. Constance, desperate to believe her plan was working, chose to see what she wanted to see. The three men began spending time at the main house, ostensibly fulfilling their part of the bargain, while actually engaging in conversations with Eleanor about books, philosophy, and dreams of life beyond Magnolia Grove. Samuel discovered that Eleanor possessed a sharp intelligence that had been hidden beneath layers of social rejection and physical limitation. She had read extensively, her isolation driving her to consume every book in her father's library. Their discussions about literature and politics revealed a mind that had been starved for intellectual stimulation. Moses found in Eleanor a sympathetic listener for his stories about Sarah. She helped him write letters that would never be sent, preserving his memories and hopes on paper. In return, he shared stories of life in the quarters, giving her a perspective on plantation life that her privileged position had always shielded her from. Isaiah and Eleanor discovered a shared love of music and scripture. He taught her the spirituals that sustained the enslaved community, while she shared the hymns she had learned in childhood. Their voices blended in the evening air, creating moments of genuine beauty amid the deception. The arrangement that had begun as a moral compromise was evolving into something unexpected: genuine friendship and mutual respect. They were all prisoners of different circumstances, but together they found a form of freedom that none had experienced before. The performance was becoming real, though not in the way Constance had intended. 3 months into their arrangement, the first signs of trouble appeared. The overseer, a cruel man named Garrett, who resented any deviation from established plantation hierarchy, began asking questions about the unusual freedom the three men enjoyed. He had noticed their regular presence at the main house and their apparent exemption from certain labor duties. Constance's financial situation continued to deteriorate despite her belief that her plan was working. Creditors grew more aggressive, and rumors about the strange goings-on at Magnolia Grove began circulating among neighboring plantations. The social isolation that had begun with Eleanor's unmarriageable status was deepening into something more dangerous. Eleanor herself was changing in ways that went beyond their carefully constructed deception. The regular human contact and intellectual stimulation had awakened something in her that had been dormant for years. She began to lose weight, not dramatically, but noticeably. More importantly, she carried herself differently, with a confidence that her mother found both surprising and troubling. The three men also faced challenges within their own community. Some of the other enslaved people viewed their special treatment with suspicion and resentment. They were caught between worlds, no longer fully part of the quarters community, but not truly free either. The psychological toll of maintaining their deception while navigating these complex social dynamics was enormous. As summer turned to autumn, it became clear that their arrangement could not continue indefinitely. The foundation of lies upon which they had built their temporary freedom was beginning to crack, and they would soon be forced to confront the consequences of their choices. The crisis came in early October when Garrett discovered Eleanor and Isaiah reading together in the plantation library. The sight of an enslaved man and a white woman sharing books in apparent intimacy was more than his prejudiced mind could tolerate. He immediately reported the incident to Constance, demanding an explanation for what he saw as a dangerous breach of social order. Constance found herself trapped by her own scheme. She could not explain the men's presence in the house without revealing the true nature of their arrangement, but she also could not allow Garrett's suspicions to grow. The overseer's threat to report the situation to the authorities forced her to confront the reality that her desperate plan had created problems far greater than those it was meant to solve. Eleanor sensed the approaching storm and made a decision that would change everything. She announced to her mother that she was pregnant, claiming that the arrangement had succeeded beyond expectations. The lie was bold and dangerous, but it served multiple purposes. It justified the men's continued presence in the house while setting a timeline for their promised freedom. The three men understood the implications of Eleanor's announcement. They now had approximately 9 months to figure out how to maintain the deception while preparing for an uncertain future. The pregnancy claim would eventually require proof, and they would need to find a way to provide it without compromising Eleanor's safety or their own. As winter approached, the atmosphere at Magnolia Grove grew increasingly tense. Everyone involved in the conspiracy understood that they were living on borrowed time, but none could see a clear path to resolution. The reckoning they had all been dreading was finally approaching. Winter brought a harsh reality to Magnolia Grove that no amount of deception could mask. Eleanor's claimed pregnancy would soon require visible evidence, and the strain of maintaining their elaborate charade was taking its toll on everyone involved. The three men found themselves walking an increasingly narrow line between hope and despair. Samuel had begun making secret preparations for their eventual departure, gathering information about routes north and safe houses along the Underground Railroad. He understood that their freedom papers, if they ever received them, might not be enough to guarantee their safety in a world where any black person could be assumed to be enslaved. Moses received devastating news when a traveling merchant brought word that Sarah had died of fever at her plantation. The information shattered his primary motivation for participating in the arrangement, leaving him adrift in a sea of grief and moral confusion. The freedom he had sought as a means to reunite with his wife now felt hollow and meaningless. Isaiah struggled with the growing complexity of his feelings for Eleanor. What had begun as a protective alliance had evolved into something deeper and more complicated. He found himself genuinely caring for her welfare, not just as part of their conspiracy, but as a human being deserving of happiness and respect. Eleanor herself was changing in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. The months of genuine human connection had awakened a strength she never knew she possessed. She began to see possibilities for her future that extended beyond the confines of Magnolia Grove. But she also understood that any escape would require careful planning and considerable courage. The winter months passed slowly, each day bringing them closer to a confrontation that none of them were prepared to face. Spring arrived with a violence that matched the emotional turmoil at Magnolia Grove. Constance's creditors had grown tired of empty promises and began legal proceedings to seize the plantation. The financial pressure, combined with growing suspicions about the unusual arrangement in her household, pushed her toward a breaking point that would shatter their carefully constructed world. Garrett's patience had also reached its limit. He confronted Constance directly, threatening to expose what he believed was happening unless she took immediate action to restore proper order. His ultimatum forced her to choose between maintaining her deception and protecting her social standing. The crisis came to a head when Eleanor's pregnancy should have been visibly obvious, but clearly was not. Constance, faced with the collapse of her scheme and the threat of public scandal, made a decision that revealed the true depth of her desperation and moral bankruptcy. She decided to sell the three men immediately, breaking her promise of freedom and eliminating the evidence of her failed plan. Eleanor learned of her mother's betrayal through a servant's whispered warning. The realization that their conspiracy was about to be violently exposed galvanized her into action. For the first time in her life, she chose to actively resist rather than passively accept her circumstances. The three men received word of their impending sale with a mixture of resignation and determination. They had always known this moment might come, but the reality was still devastating. Samuel began implementing the escape plans he had been secretly developing, while Moses and Isaiah struggled with the decision to abandon everything they had ever known. The final confrontation was approaching, and none of them could predict how it would end. The last night at Magnolia Grove brought all the conspirators together one final time in the tobacco barn where their alliance had begun. Eleanor had managed to slip away from the house, carrying a small bag of her mother's jewelry and what little money she could gather. The three men had made their choice. They would attempt to escape together, taking Eleanor with them rather than leaving her to face her mother's wrath alone. Samuel had established contact with conductors on the Underground Railroad, but the journey would be dangerous for all of them, especially for Eleanor, whose physical limitations and racial identity would make her both a burden and a target. The decision to include her in their escape was as morally complex as their original arrangement had been. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor made a confession that stunned them all. She revealed that she had been slowly poisoning her mother with small doses of arsenic from the plantation's rat poison, not enough to kill, but enough to cause the weakness and confusion that had marked Constance's recent behavior. The revelation added another layer of moral complexity to their situation. Eleanor was not the passive victim they had believed her to be. The barn that had witnessed their first desperate conversation now became the site of their final transformation. They were no longer the same people who had entered into their arrangement 9 months earlier. The experience had changed them all, revealing capacities for both cruelty and compassion that none had fully understood before. As dawn broke over Magnolia Grove for the last time, they slipped away into the morning mist, leaving behind a world that had shaped them but no longer defined them. Their destination was uncertain, their future unclear, but for the first time in their lives, they were choosing their own path. The tobacco barn stood empty, its weathered boards keeping their secrets as Constance Whitmore awakened to discover that her world had vanished in the night, leaving her alone with the consequences of her choices.